Hello everybody. In this video I'm going to be talking about a couple things. First of all, I wanted to review the Hermetic principles because I saw these videos come out on YouTube and I figured, hey, why not? Since I'm very interested in studying the ancient mysteries, and mainly because they said that all the greats in the past have studied them and like applied the Hermetic principles. And the Hermetic principles are, see, I have a problem with them because the first one says that everything is mental, right? Everything is in the mind. So basically, if you can like change your thoughts, you can change your reality. And the problem with this is that, well, there are two problems. The first problem is that all of the Hermetic principles are interpreted as Hermetic principles for our, or as principles applied, like from a practical standpoint. Their application is to this world, to this modern era in which we live. So right away you'll hear like everything is mental, and it's like, okay, and then they'll say, so you can basically like manifest, right? If you want money, if you want a good job, if you want a good relationship, manifest that, right? And it's like, oh my God, like the ancient Egyptians or whoever these people were that came up with these ideas weren't like thinking about that, right? They weren't thinking about like a new car or a new house or any of this crap. So that's my first problem with it, with these seven principles, that their current modern interpretation is always like towards our modern era, right? Where basically we're focused on objectives, very capitalistic objectives from our modern times, right? And I want to understand them not from that perspective, but from the ancient perspective, right? Like, what did they use those ideas for, right? And these are fundamental ideas, these are beginner ideas. So it's kind of like when you start studying something, like let's say psychology 101, and the professor's like, what is psychology? Let's define psychology. And then it's like the first class is the definition of psychology, right? These seven principles are like that. It's basically like define them, understand them, and then from here we'll continue. So I feel also like I'm stuck, right? That's why I want to like review them and understand them from like ancient perspectives, not modern perspectives. And my second problem is that besides the first one, I feel like the other six, number 2 to 7, are basically the same thing. They're saying the same thing. That's my problem with it. Now I was thinking about this and I came to the conclusion that they aren't the same thing. But then I'm like, well, you're like I told myself, and it's kind of like an ego thing, like a Taurus thing, but I could say, well, normally I'm not wrong, I'm right. And I'm right about this. They are the same thing because, see, I was watching the videos. I haven't finished watching the videos. I still need to watch the video for number 6 and number 7. But I was watching number 1, number 2, principle number 3. And then when I came across principle number 3, I was like, whoa, this is not the same. But then like listening more to it, which is the principle of rhythm, I was like, no, wait, it is the same. But it's because they use like the same examples, right? They use like the examples of night and day, hot and cold, the changing of the seasons, right? And if you studied any esotericism or any esoteric teachings, they talk about these natural cycles, right? Especially with the principle of rhythm. Now, the seasons, we know there are 4, but night and day is a very polar idea, and the idea of polarity is in there, the idea of correspondence is in there, the idea of what's this other one, of gender, right? Male, female, or masculine qualities, feminine qualities. But my problem with it is like they all sound the same. Number 1 is the all is mind, and mind is the all, or something like that. And then we start off with number 2, or after that, we jump to number two, and number two is the famous, now famous, or popularized as above, below, as below, above, right? Now, watching these videos, I understood. Now, I'm going to tell you my conclusion for this before I continue. My conclusion for this is basically that they are the same, but they're also different. And that difference is what I'm trying to understand, because I think it's very easy for anybody to dismiss these fundamentals. And if you dismiss the fundamentals, how are you going to advance? How are you going to continue to make progress in your study of the Hermetic principles, or the ancient teachings, or the ancient secrets, right? Like they say that the Egyptians actually scatter all of the information around so no one can have like access to all of it. So it's basically like, that type of teacher that doesn't give you the answers, but all of the answers are there like in pieces, and you have to study them, right? You don't have to come to your own conclusions. The answers are there. You just have to look for them and put the pieces together like a giant cultural puzzle, right? That's what I think the Egyptians did, and that's what I think I would have to do as a student, right? That's kind of what I'm starting to do as a student, because I do want to understand these ancient secrets, and more than anything, like how we can apply them to our modern life. Well, how I can apply them, but without that cliche of like, oh yeah, just think positive thoughts, send out good vibes, meditate, and it's like, yeah, that doesn't really work. I'm trying to understand like what's beyond that, right? So my conclusion is that yes, they are the same, but they're also not the same. Now I'm going to start talking about some things that I found out of each principle. The first principle is the principle of unity, right? And there's an interesting thing, because I have here the numbers written down, and I studied the symbology of numbers, their symbolic meaning, because when I would read the tarot cards, I would need to know many things, but I would also need to know the meaning of the numbers, right? And I didn't know this. I still don't kind of know this. And the Hermetic principles, I'm studying them because I don't really know them. So I wanted to kind of review them. Excuse me. But basically, I started relating, for me, it became very obvious with number two. Principle number two is the principle of polarity. And, let me know in the comments if I make mistakes, because I don't have any notes for this, just a couple of things. But I'm just going to be talking about the principles as I think of them. The second one talks of polar opposites, right? So like the yin yang, night and day, hot and cold, these type of ideas, which are actually complementary. And the video goes into explaining. And if, in case you want to watch the videos, it's in the channel is called Stoic Mindset Geek, right? And so far that person has uploaded like 8 videos, each of the principles, and then a video with all of the principles, I think. And the second one, is polarity, and it talks about that balance between two opposites, right? Polarity, two polar opposites, and how they actually like balance each other out, right? How, for example, in order for you to, which I think this is very theoretical, because how can you prove it, right? But they say, like, how can you enjoy life if you don't suffer, right? Or like when you suffer and then you get to have pleasure again, you get to enjoy things. It's like after, I don't know, working all day, like a hard day's work, and then you get home and it's the weekend and you're like, oh yeah, like I can enjoy myself now, and you feel it like with more intensity, right? If that makes sense. You feel it like it's nicer than it would be if you were just on vacation for like a whole month, and then like one week out of those months, you would think about what it feels, and you would just say like, well, yeah, it's not that great because I've been on vacation all this time, right? But so that's what it talks about. It talks about how, and also how there's good in the bad and there's bad and the good, like the yin yang. So like it says at one point that the seed or the seed of the solution or something like that is in the problem. Um, and then again, but these are interpretations of modern times, because then I would say in the solution is also the seed of another problem, right? Like you always want to look at, like, these people always interpret things very positively, right? Like very positively in terms of like flowers and pink and sunshine, right? But they don't mention how, like, if you are looking at it from from an objective standpoint, you would also have to consider that just as you go out of darkness to go into light, you're also going to go into light to go into darkness, right? Which that is actually the rhythm, the principle of rhythm, or the principle of it's either number 3 or number 5. I think it's number 5. There's one, oh no, number 3 is vibration, and number 5 is rhythm. So the rhythms are like that, right? Like there's and see, they're all kind of interconnected. They all kind of say the same thing, kind of. Okay, so the first one talks about how the all is mind, unity, right? And again, with the numbers, I wanted to see if the numbers had any relation, because as I was speaking right now about number 2, number 2 talks of polarity, and number 2 is actually symbolically and esoterically, it's a dual number. Well, duh, it's 2. It represents polar, right? It represents that there are 2 of something, and typically when there are 2 of something, they are opposites, and yet they complement each other, right? Kind of like night and day, kind of how pleasure and pain, right? You wouldn't feel the same type of pleasure, like, on the weekend if you didn't work all week, right? Pain, right? So that type of idea. And then I started thinking, well, like, is there any relation between the rest of the numbers, number 1 to 7, esoterically speaking, with the principles and how they unite? Because like the zodiac has a lot of those like the zodiac has a lot of things that are weird in terms of organization. They're very well organized, right? Like each one, like if you split them into seasons, there are 4 sections, right? Because in seasons there are 4 seasons, and then there are 12 zodiac signs. So if you split them in 4, you get 3 signs for each season, right? And then it goes cardinal, fixed, mutable, right? Or flexible, I think, right? And it goes like also, it starts with Aries, it ends with Pisces. I don't remember right now, but there are a lot of like different ways that you can organize the zodiac with its opposites, right? Like each opposite is kind of like a reflection of it, and like, like the opposite of a fixed is a fixed, right? Like Taurus with Scorpio, or a mutable with a mutable, like Virgo and Pisces, right? And those type of I forget the name, but those type of coincidences, right? Like coincidences or correlations, or weird connections, right? I think they weren't done, because you can look at something and say, oh yeah, I understand it, and then years down the line, you'll learn of another connection, right? And you'll be like, oh man, like, there's the element part of the zodiac, right? Obviously fire signs, water signs, etc. But then there's like the masculine, feminine quality. There are like different types of there are different ways that you can separate and connect and correlate coincidentally the zodiac signs. So I was thinking about that with the Hermetic principles and the numbers, and I started to kind of do some digging with ChatGPT, and it gave me some ideas, like how number 1 is like unity, and basically from the all, where the all is mental, the all is mind. Like the idea of the first Hermetic principle is basically that there's an all, like, I don't know if it's God or what, like there's like we are in the mind of the all, and basically, like, just like you would, I think this is in the Kybalion, the book that teaches the Hermetic principles, which I'm still not done reading. but how you can basically think of a story, right, in your mind. Like think of J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter, or George R.R. Martin um, with Game of Thrones, right? You can think of a world in your mind, right? And these characters like come to life in your mind. Well, we are characters in the mind of the all of like this person, I guess, that's like thinking of us, and we are characters in this person's mind, and this person has basically like created us, right? Like the all has created us. That's basically like the idea behind the first principle. Now there's another idea. See, there are all these ideas in each of the principles. The other idea is that I take from it, like from a practical, and I was talking about how it's not only like the modern interpretations, but like, you know, what I would look at as like maybe even the ancient interpretations of all this, is that you have to be an active participant in your, you know, and they always exemplify with science these principles. They always say like science, you know, they bring up with the first principle the quantum slit experiment, how like the observer or observing something changes its trajectory or its potentiality. Like how if you're not looking at it, certain wave particles like stay waves or are different than if you look at them, they change. So it goes to say that your observation, your active participation in things alters them, right? That's what basically principle number one talks about. Now, to this, I wanted to talk about A Dangerous Method, the movie, which is of Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and this patient becomes student, and then like scientist, well, like psychoanalyst. I forget her name, but the movie, I don't want to talk about like the patient student. I want to talk about the relationship between Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, where they were at odds because Carl Jung wanted to explore other avenues of thought, whereas Sigmund Freud wanted to stick with sexuality, basically. You know, Sigmund Freud being stubborn Taurus, and he was older than Carl Jung. He, like, way older. He wanted to basically only stick with those notions, the notions that he had already come up with. And you see, I don't really know who I agree with here, because Carl Jung, I think I favor Carl Jung more, but I understand Freud's position too. Carl Jung wanted to not revolutionize, but like bring in more instruments, bring in more tools, esoteric tools. He wanted to bring in notions. He's the one that developed the idea of the collective unconscious. He worked more with the unconscious, with the old cultures, with symbolism, with archetypes, right? He's the one that develops all of these like abstract, very abstract notions, which I love. You know, Freud's like very simple. Freud's like dreams, sex, and you know, infancy, like your childhood. And Freud and Jung has like this broad, like he has more concepts, right? And that was kind of dumb. I was gonna say like a broader spectrum or something like that, but anyway, yeah. So in the movie A Dangerous Method, at one point, Jung and Freud, in different times of the movie, they're discussing with other people, not with among them or between themselves, but with other people, what they think about the other person, right? And you know, Carl Jung in the movie the whole time is like, yeah, Freud is like, you know, shooting my ideas down, and he's not on my side, and you know, and then at one point Freud is like, yeah, Carl Jung, you know, I found this to be interesting because Carl Jung said something along the lines of no, Freud said something along the lines of like substitution. He said, and psychotherapically or clinically, maybe you could say, yeah, that's not good, because Freud says The only thing Carl Jung is doing is like substituting one neurosis for another one. So if the person is messed up and you know, psychologically they have some certain like disorder, and you tell them, okay, you know, let's look at the ancient cultures, let's look at symbolism, let's look at these other venues, right? Taoism, Zen, whatever, Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever. And the person's like, oh yeah, you're right, oh wow, I'm cured, right? And then Freud in that case says that person is not cured, that person has just substituted one thing for another. You know, it's kind of like you know, very respectfully, like people that are recovering from drugs, like drug addicts, and you know, they go to like AA meetings or NA meetings or whatever, and you know, they're not doing drugs anymore, but then they start smoking cigarettes a lot or drinking a lot of coffee, right? Or they start, or like or like people that are in AA will obsessively start going to meetings, right? So it's like, you know, I was in Neurotics Anonymous for a while, and you know, they teach you that your recovery can be done like in a healthy way, or also neurotically, right? So since you're a neurotic person, you're always like, like, you know, I hate, like, everybody get out of my way, like, you guys are so dumb, I'm good, you know, and you want to work fast and get things done quickly. You know, with your recovery, you do it the same way, so you're still the same person, right? And in that way, or in that term, or in that behind that way, I understand Freud. I say, okay, like, he's right about that. So you know, the substitution, but Jung at one point says something about, I think, I don't know if I'm wrong or if I'm remembering the movie wrongly, but he says something about you being active in your recovery, right? Because Freud and psychoanalysis, I've gone to therapy with a psychoanalyst, and psychoanalysis, if you guys know anything about that, it's very time consuming, it's long, it's years, and there's no guarantee that you will be cured, right? It's just you going to talk about whatever, about your childhood, talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And I think compared to other methods of psychotherapy, like behavioral therapy or cognition therapy, it's not very practical. You don't really do anything, right? I think people will kind of be like, at first they'll be like nervous, but after being there for a while, for a couple of months, after a couple sessions, you'll probably start feeling like you're not making any progress. So they say it's not a therapy that's for everybody, right? It's more of a therapy, I think, if you want to be talking to someone for like a really long time, right? Years, decades even, right? I don't know. But anyway, that was Freud. Freud was like, yeah, just let them talk. They'll heal when they want to heal, right? You're not going to give them any tools. You're just going to listen, right? And Jung, I guess, was kind of like, yeah, you know, and I would really like to learn more about their differences, ideological, professional, and personal differences, right? Like, I would really want to know this student patient of Carl Jung, and then I think Freud also treated her. I'm not really sure if Freud did, but she's actually like the one who brought them together, and then she kind of like made them well, she didn't make them fight, but she was involved in that stuff because she had an affair with Carl Jung, and you know, Carl Jung lied to Freud, some stuff like that. But yeah, it made me think about their relationship, like ideologically, why were they so different? I mean, maybe it could have been the age difference too. I don't know what age gap they had, but you know, because at one point Freud's like, Carl Jung tells Freud, like, you think you're the father, you think you're the patriarch, right? And I'm just like your student, your son, right? But anyway, so Freud had this very passive way about him, and Jung was more active, right? Younger, he was also more active, and I guess he wanted people to take an active role in their recovery, right? We could say, as opposed to Freud. Now, back to the first Hermetic principle. The first Hermetic principle, I think, the way I'm interpreting it, tells us to take an active role in our, not our recovery, but in life, right? And this kind of goes hand in hand with the principle of vibration, which is the third principle. Now, the third principle tells us that everything is vibrating in the universe, right? There's vibration everywhere. Now, there's vibration that is really fast and high, and there's vibration that is very low and slow, right? And it's kind of like when you're, and you need both, right? That's the balance aspect of all this. There are moments when you're really excited and you're up and about and working and shouting, screaming, yelling, dancing, playing, singing, talking, chatting, having fun, all excited. And then there are moments when you feel down, right? When you're reflective, when you're bored, when you have low energy, when you're thinking, right? And at one point, one of the videos says the objective is not to always have a positive. That's kind of like where I agree, because I'm like, yeah, you have to mention that, like you have to be able to know how to navigate both like extremes. Now, there's an idea too that tries to neutralize the extremes, so you kind of find balance and you're not either too excited or too reflective, right? You just kind of like live a moderate life, which again, I would say, what would be the point of finding like that Buddhist, meditative, like contemplative balance, right? That, like, no thrill, no up and no down, right? But okay, I mean, I'm guessing that's more advanced stuff. So to understand it, you would have to kind of like jam different types of ideas, or make different types of ideas like fit, right? Kind of like a puzzle, which I mentioned that already. But anyway, so Carl Jung was more active in this case. And the first Hermetic principle, like I mentioned, I think talks about that. It talks about us being more active, because the all is mind, and the way you think. It basically, in modern interpretation, it tells us the way you think affects your exterior, your life, your lifestyle, right? Your thoughts, your feelings, right? So be careful what you think about. I also look at it as like you're in control. So like, for example, me studying the Hermetic principles and the esoteric teachings and the ancient secrets, I kind of want to learn more about it. So it's kind of like a focal point, right? Like wherever you focus your attention, that's what you're gonna, that's why they say like don't watch like violent videos, or all these people that are watching all these serial killer documentaries, or violent music, or things like that, because ultimately that's what you're focusing on, and that's how you're going to be feeling, right? So if I focus my attention, it's like these secrets are secret, but they can be uncovered, they can be studied, they can be reviewed and understood in different ways, so you can actually apply them, and that's where my attention is going, right? So that's already something that I'm focusing on, and it's like the application of the first principle, right? With the number one meaning unity, and the beginning and the creation of all, right? Now, the second principle, like I already mentioned, is the polarity principle, and it deals with number two. But something very interesting that I got from the second principle is, it says as above, below, below, above, and there's an image of a tree that they show, which is very interesting, because the tree has a trunk, it has branches, and then it has roots, right? And it's interesting because the roots and the branches look similar, right? They look pretty much the same, right? They're all these like different like strings or whatever, right? The ramifications that spread out of the trunk. So if you were to like flip a tree upside down, it would basically still look the same, right? Except without the leaves, right? Because the roots don't have leaves, or maybe they do because they're underground too. But yeah, that's the second principle. And there's this other thing that I was gonna say, which was interesting about the second principle, is that this can be applied vertically or horizontally. So they say like the way you are, as above, below, as below, above, basically means that like the spiritual realm is the same as the physical realm, and the physical realm is the same as the spiritual realm. Or like the rich people live very similar to how poor people live, right? In a lot of different ways, right? Not only like with money, but in other ways, like how they probably interact with each other and do things, and like white collar crime and blue collar crime, things like that. um, and the other idea, which is the horizontal idea, is like the way you are inside is the way you treat others outside, right? As in, so is out, and as out, so is in. You think of like your house. How is your house? Is your house dirty? Is your house clean? Well, that's the way your mind is, your heart is, right? Your mind or your heart are also, do you have a lot of clutter? Do you have a lot of things you don't need? Then you probably think a lot of things you don't need, right? Or you worry about problems you don't need to worry about. If it's clean, then your mind is also clean, right? Things like that. So it's like this, polarity is also like correspondence, right? It's like, outside matches inside, inside matches outside. It's the same thing. Up top is the same as below, below is the same as up top. But again, there's that idea of trying to neutralize the extremes and trying to stay in the middle and find moderation and balance and stability and structure. So the third principle, number 3, deals with creativity. And the third principle is the vibration principle, which says that everything is vibrating, like I mentioned. So there are moments when you vibrate high and low, and you need to learn how to basically like, well, that's from the 5th principle, but I'm going to apply it because, see, I think there's a relation between the 3rd and the 5th and the 7th and the 1st. And then there's a relation between the 2nd, the 4th, and the 6th. Because the 2nd, the 4th, and the 6th have to do with like two of something, right? Like the 6th one is cause and effect. And the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th, which are actually the odd numbers versus the even numbers, if you see, have to deal with like creation. But again, it's like the spiral, like first there's a certain level of creation, then a second level of creation, which would be the 3rd principle, then a 3rd and a 4th, right, with principle number 5 and 7. But the 3rd principle talks about vibration, like I mentioned, right? There are moments when you're vibrating high, vibrating low. And the 5th one talks of cycles, right, which is the principle of rhythm. Now cycles, they say like, well, like winter and summer, right? You need to prepare for the winter. You need to, well, it's not like the old days, like stock up on food, right? But maybe you buy a jacket, you buy more blankets, whatever, or you prepare for things for winter, right? Like maybe I'm gonna be home all day, so I have to do these things, X, Y, Z, whatever. And they always like mention this example of like the waves, how like a person that's learning how to surf has to adapt to the waves, right? And you can't like expect to ride a wave when there's no wave, right? That's like expecting to have a snowball fight in summer when there's no snow, right? Or expecting to have like a barbecue when it's winter, right? So you have to detect these things and plan for them, and then learn to ride them. See, a lot of this is like tapping into your intuition, listening to what the context is telling you, the environment and yourself, and responding to that so you can kind of like flow with it. I think that's the true nature of a magician. It's not so much that you're altering things to your will, it's that you see things that are already there, the laws, the secrets, and then you can just like go with the flow and do amazing things, right? Extraordinary, spectacular things. So anyway, that's the 3rd principle and the 5th. I'll get into the 5th in a moment. The 4th one is the principle of correspondence. See, I get mixed up between the 2nd and the 4th. It's either polarity is the 2nd, or correspondence, or the 4th one is correspondence. But that's where I have a hard time kind of distinguishing these notions, because correspondence also talks about like like polar opposites, right? Like there's black and there's white, there's night and there's day, right? There's all these things which are like opposites, and there's like a correspondence to it, right? Now, number four symbolizes structure and stability, right? Like the four legs of a table, right? I think they're called legs, piernas in Spanish. They're the four feet. No, yeah, like like a table has four like things, right, that it sticks on. So it's like structure for people, has like that idea of like structure also, like me, Ben, Jerry, and Tom, and we're like the four friends, and we have, it like creates that stability. Like three people have that creativity flow to them, four people have that like structure to them, right? It's also like mom, dad, brother, and sister, right? Like the Simpsons. Well, there's Maggie in it, but that's like the original structure, the four. The fifth structure, four other things with four, like the four elements. With the fifth one is like I already mentioned, it's the one of rhythm, right? And rhythm deals with the changes of the cycle, which is actually the last one that I just studied today. That one deals. See, I already forgot four. If you noticed, I didn't really like remember four, and four and two are kind of like, so I need to work on distinguishing them a little bit more. But five deals with change. It deals with rhythm. So we're talking about like the seasons of the year, and with planning. You also have to plan with number five, and with the principle of rhythm, right? Now, the sixth and the seventh one, I haven't really studied them, but I'll just get into them a little bit. The sixth one deals the principle of cause and effect, right? Which I think I was already, see, I remember number four, the principle number four, and the Hermetic principle number four, and the Hermetic principle number six were principles that I was already coming to in my own head. And you can go watch my videos where I talk about balance, and where I talk about cause and effect. I get into those topics deeply. And cause and effect, I think maybe if I had to choose like a favorite principle, it would probably be number six. But it talks about but I've talked about that relationship, how there's a cause and then there's an effect, and that effect eventually turns into a cause for another effect, and how you can go either backwards or forwards, and a cause is an effect, and an effect is a cause, and things like that. So number six also deals with responsibility. And there's actually like the 6-point star of the Jewish faith of David, and as above, below, as below, above. And well, when we're talking about cause and effect, we're talking about responsibility, I guess. And with number four, with principle number four, the principle of correspondence, that one deals with the fact that between two extremes, there's a connection, right? So when it's hot and then it's cold, in order for something to go from hot to cold, it has to go through certain degrees, right? Just like night, there's night and there's day, but then there's like the sunset and the sunrise. So that halfway point is like the degrees, right? Or when you're feeling sad, and then you feel happy, in order to get from sad to happy, or from happy to sad, you had to cross like the degrees, right? So the principle of correspondence, if I'm not mistaken, basically tells us that the two extremes are part of the same thing, right? It's like one category. And I think I had already talked about this before, how like the extremes are basically like the same thing, but just in different degrees. So if you know how to basically tap into that, you'll be able to go from one extreme to the other. From happy, like if you're sad, you'll be able to go to happy if you know how to apply that, I guess, correctly. Again, that's like a modern interpretation. And the seventh one deals with gender or generativity, generation, like generating something. And it talks about, 7 is the number of spiritual completion, right? Like the 7 days of the week, like God rested on the seventh day because it was completed, things like that. And the 7 represents that completion of a cycle or of something, spiritually, esoterically, and symbolically. And the principle deals with the fact that there are masculine and feminine energies all around us. Not just men and women that help to create, life, but also in other areas, right? And there's even like, just like there's black and white and there's white and black, like the yin yang symbol. There's masculine in femininity and there's femininity in masculinity and things like that, right? But ultimately, all of that is, I think, so you can create, and I would even dare say, like, bring back the circle, full circle, right? And then start off with one again in the creation. Um, so, yeah, for me, as I already mentioned, like principles 2 to 7 were basically like the same, but I'm trying to stay away from that idea and trying to see them in different ways so I can understand them more. Um, so I could say, as far as was I right or was I wrong, I was part right. I was right that they are the same, but I'm also wrong because they're different, right? So it's ambivalent, it's paradoxical, right? And in relation to the Jung and Freud debate, um, I don't know what I would say because I think that really impacted me when Freud was like, "You're just gonna substitute things," but in that, if we're talking in those terms, then I would say, maybe Freud was more morally righteous. He had a big superego. That's what he called it. The superego is like the spiritual aspect of yourself, the one that's like, morally correct and knows right from wrong. So maybe he had a big superego and he was like, no, we're not going to cure patients by just giving them substitutions. But then you can say we're all neurotic always unless we have substitutions, right? Because even if you do think to yourself like, okay, after 25 years, 35 years of doing psychoanalysis, I finally cracked the code and I understand myself now. That can also be a substitution, right? What makes you think that that's the right thing, right? So I think I'm gonna side with Jung so far. I would have to learn more about this infighting between the ideologies of Jung and Freud. Um, but yeah, for now, I think I'm gonna side with Jung and say, yeah, I agree more with Jung, even though even though it may be futile, and it's just a substitution. Well, so what? It's not like we're eternal. So if we were eternal, maybe you could do psychoanalysis. But human expectancy or life expectancy is like 70, 80 years. So it's like you're not gonna spend 40 years, and even finding a new substitution, right? Like I said, that could just be another substitution. You're not going to spend that much time doing that. So why not look for like, if I told you like you're going to suffer 40 years in psychotherapy, excuse me, and then you're going to find one substitution and be happy for like 10 years and then die, or you're going to find a new substitution every like 10 years. So you're going to have maybe like 5 different thought processes or beliefs, but you're gonna live like happy when you find those, and then you may be depressed again, but it beats the 40 years of suffering, right? Like Jung's way would be like having highs, like ups and downs. See, and that's another thing that I don't really understand, if it's good to live with highs and lows, or if it's better to just find moderation and balance, but what happens when you find balance is that you get bored, right? Because where you find excitement and fun is with the highs, right? And then with the lows you suffer tremendously, but it's like karma, like you gotta pay. It's like when you're hungover after you had fun drinking the night before, right? Or you can just not drink at all, but when you don't drink at all, well, you're bored. What are you gonna do, right? So it's like, we're at this stage, philosophically speaking or psychologically speaking, as humanity. But you know, I think we can further develop the ideas, and you know, like I'm just gonna continue reading on all this and studying, and I'll let you guys know what, you know. I make these videos whenever, you know, my intuition tells me like just make a video. I think you need to study this, you need to review this, you need to divulge it, let it be known. I just do it. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and that's all I got for this one. So I'll see you in the next one. All right, peace.